To fall in this context was to help us carve out, through knowledge and through discernment, our own spiritual path to attain wisdom and therefore start on an ascension path. A repetitive and archetypal theme within the multiverse is one of there being a fall, whether it's beings who have fallen or an entire universe that has fallen. So today, I'm going to be explaining exactly what it means to go through a fall. When we first think of a fall, our minds typically go to the creation story with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And that to fall, in that case, is to give in to temptation and go from a state of unity and oneness with Source into a separate state, one that is cardinal and based in a physical identity divorced from its original higher spiritual state that it once lived in. Now, when we're talking about this type of fall, one from a higher unified state into a physical separate state, that is not always seen as a negative thing in mysticism. Some branches of mysticism actually see that as a very positive thing, such like Gnosticism. From a Gnostic perception, going into a lower realm was required as a necessity to gain spiritual sovereignty and gain that sovereignty through our own trials and tribulations, which would then cultivate wisdom. And that wisdom would eventually lead us to even a higher state, a state beyond the Garden of Eden. So in this case, the fall creation myth was looked at as a necessity for our own spiritual sovereignty, because that original state of the Garden of Eden was not a positive state, and it was not a truly unified state. In this creation story, that state that we fell from was actually a good thing, and it was because that state was one of a negative form of singularity. And what I mean by a negative form of singularity was it was holding our consciousness, our personal individuated consciousnesses, hostage in the form of spiritual slavery. And so there needed to be some form of trickster entity, whether that's Sophia, or sometimes it's Christ, or sometimes it's another character, some trickster energy to come and to help us out of that state and go into a lower state. So to fall in this context was to help us carve out, through knowledge and through discernment, our own spiritual path to attain wisdom and therefore start on an ascension path. And that ascension path would eventually help us redeem ourselves and redeem our God spark into a higher level of reality, one that's beyond this universal matrix and beyond the false God in the lower realms of this universal matrix. And so because of all of this type of creation myth, that is where the fall starts to become more than just one way depicted as a negative event. But beyond these two different versions of the fall, whether we were tempted out of our innocence and unity into a lesser state, or we were actually assisted by divine powers into a lesser state only to be redeemed higher, there is yet another deeper meaning to what it means to be fallen and to go through a fall. And when we understand this, then the other ones are either obsolete or they make more sense. A fall is when a being or a civilization or even an entire galaxy has reached a majority within itself that seeks to nourish itself through force rather than through mutual energy transfer and mutual energy exchange. In simple terms, when a being falls, it has chosen to serve itself through force. So now we have to explore what exactly is force and how is one nourished through force. We may not understand nourishment at a cosmic level. Think of nourishment as a necessity within all of creation. A baby is entirely dependent on outside nourishment from its surroundings for its survival and for its maturation. As adults, we too require more than just physical food for nourishment. This invisible nourishment is met through our emotional body. It is fed through our personal aspirations, the depth of our emotional connections with others, our capacity to know thyself, And once we start to awaken, our invisible nourishment is most fed through a sense of purpose. Even at a universal level, universes require nourishment through the conscious or unconscious energy exchange taking place in the web of life. This is best understood through the fourth way teaching of reciprocal maintenance. So, for an entity of any kind to fall means they are gaining their nourishment and their energetic sustenance through some act of force. Force includes coercion, slavery, mind control, abuse, concealing knowledge from others, intentionally traumatizing others for control. These are all different ways that a being can siphon the life force of others in order to dominate it. Fallen beings are using force to compensate for the energy that they could be nourished by from conscious energy exchange. Because when you extract your nourishment through force, it is experienced like a surge of violent and addictive energy called loosh. If you'd like to learn more about loosh, you can watch my video, Loosh Explained. The highest level of reality that can fall is a universe. A whole universal matrix can go through a fall. But if a whole universal matrix is not at a fall, you can still experience a fall within that universe. It's just not at that high of a level. So for instance, you can experience a fall, but not the whole universe. That fall can take place at a lower level within that universe, like a whole race of hyperdimensional beings can go through a fall. They can be a fallen race, or an entire galaxy can become fallen. So when a galaxy goes through a fall, that's not the whole universe, but that's still at a lower level within that universe. Or you can have a solar system go through a fall, or you can have a planet go through a fall. So there's not just only fallen races, you can have a whole fallen system. And this is where we really have to understand what going through a fall is, because we could see that it's one, taking place at a larger scale, such as whether it's a universe or whether it's a galaxy or whether it's a whole solar system. Or you can have fallen beings and fallen races. And this is where we're starting to understand what the fallen angels were. There are two kinds of falls. The first kind is intentional, and the second kind is sequential. The first fall is a deliberate one. This is where a being or an entity deliberately disconnects from the universal channel of infinite energy in order to feed itself through force. You can compare this process in human terms to tasting a bite of a donut and then craving the taste of that sugar rush over the taste of a healthy and satisfying meal. The reason this kind of a fall is a deliberate one is because the entity still has a full choice at that point to feed itself through poor quality sugar rushes or a healthy and satisfying meal. Now, pretend it's not a donut or a sugar rush. Instead, perceive that craving is for the life force that is held inside other beings. An entity that chooses to fall is one that deliberately decides to explore the path of forcing others to serve it. The fall did not just happen once a long time ago, and it doesn't just happen to angels. In fact, half of the stories we hear about fallen angels are not true. Higher density beings, called angels, have fallen, and they continue to fall. We see this anytime a being came to the third density with the intention to liberate humanity, but then sets up a system to extract worship. Ironically, half of the stories that were passed down to us about fallen angels were told to us from a fallen entity that wanted the title of God. Those fallen entities calling themselves God made up stories to control humanity, when the actual source God, which is the totality of everything, sent more of its energy, aka angels, into its dream to help people awaken out of the spiritual slavery they were cycling in. So many of the fallen angels were not fallen. They were trying to break humanity free from the spell of a psychopath. The second way for a being to fall is far more innocent and sequential. It is when an entity of any kind is traumatized into a state of narcissism. In fact, this pathway is truly the only form of fallen that can be redeemed, because it is not a choice per se. It is not true evil. It is truly a victim of circumstance, and it can be healed. I know that may sound controversial, but it is vital for a maturing seeker to understand this difference. Esoterica cannot dilute this truth just because it doesn't sound pleasant. All evil can be redeemed, but that does not mean that all evil wants to be redeemed. Some fallen beings truly enjoy their service to self pathway, and they are only trying desperately to prolong it as much as they can, while others fall into it but wish to heal. The most innocent and easiest way for any being to fall is to move into narcissism. If you'd like to understand how this happens through narcissism, you can watch my video, The Spiritual Roots of Narcissism. Once we start seeing the inherent duality that is embedded within creation, we start realizing how much drama existing really is. And we also start seeing how to be fallen or to go through a fall is almost an archetypal cyclical theme. It's an inevitable theme once we enter into an experience of separation and one where, as God, we have free will. So we could look at it almost like it's going to be an inherent part of any journey. And it's going to be the challenges that cultivate us, the challenges that make us grow and evolve so that we can truly see what we would be if we were placed under amnesia, if we were going through veils of forgetfulness, and then once we're in that state of disconnection and separation, once we're placed deeply into a dreamlike state, now we get to see what our true character is and what our true character would do. Would it align with service to all and help serve others to awaken into its remembrance? Or would it fall deeper into that dream state and want to serve itself only by helping harness more power and helping manipulate more parts of source into serving that one soul unit or a whole fallen group? So we could look at these as different parts of a dream state, and all of it taking place within a dream. Which brings up an even bigger question. What part is the dream? Reality? Or what's beyond reality when we're awakened? Because if we're awakened, now we're truly in an undivided state of God. And so that could even be like a dreamlike state. Which one of these is the real dream? What if going through a spiritual awakening and what if evolving is us just becoming more sovereign and therefore having more conscious choice in selecting what dream we want to occupy and what we want to call real within that dream? So why would a being fall in the first place down a service to self pathway? Why would they choose that? Well, there's something very interesting that happens, and that's because we're a part of the unified field of consciousness. We actually magnetize another part of the unified field of consciousness into a stronger polarity whenever we go in one direction. So the stronger we have a polarity in one direction, it will create, because we're all a part of the fabric of the unified field of consciousness, a stronger polarity in the opposite direction. So it's inevitable in the sense that when a part of the unified field of consciousness, or we could just look at it as us, when we want to strongly help others, or we ourselves want to strongly develop into a higher state of consciousness, and we want to go through a spiritual awakening, and we want to evolve, and we want everyone to not be harmed, and we want everyone to prosper and be abundant and safe. That is such a strong polarity towards unity and love that it also creates the very opposite, which is another part of that fabric of the unified field of consciousness strengthens its wanting and growth in the opposite direction. It strengthens its orientation into one where it feels so drawn to siphoning, and it feels so drawn into becoming addicted into serving itself. And if you tap in to what that feels like for a moment, to be fully and utterly service to self, I'm not even talking at this point about narcissism or about just anyone who has an ego. I'm specifically talking about tapping into the experience of an utterly fallen being into service to self. What you will find is the energy that is completely possessed with addiction. Now, I don't mean addiction in the sense where people are recovering or people are going through their own trials and tribulations in this lifetime, okay? I am talking about addiction from a completely different dimension and from the most esoteric level that we can talk about addiction from. It is a part of the psyche, a part of the body, mind, spirit at that point that is utterly taken over by the sensation to siphon other beings, other parts of existence, other universes, other galaxies. It wants to utterly dominate and siphon their life force for themselves. And because that really serves a deep need that they have, it's like full possession just of the service to self thought form at that point that does not think clearly. It doesn't think clearly at all. It could even be a master at technology, or it could even be a master or genius in specific fields of expertise. And that still doesn't even matter because its aims just don't make sense and they're wild and wicked. So wanting to dominate and siphon the life force of whatever that structure that they're aimed at is, whether that's another being or whether that's at a galactic level, whether that's at a whole universal level. It's really difficult for us to conceive of having a predator nature at this metaphysical level of reality. We could think of a predator nature when we're thinking of the animal kingdom or National Geographic looking type stuff. But we can't think of having a predator nature this precise, this disingenuous, and this genius at a metaphysical level. And because of that, a lot of things that are taking place in our reality, we don't see in its proper context. I hope this has helped explain that existing is drama. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through spiritual awakening. See you next time.